And we're live streaming.
All right, thank you. Is Councilmember Pell? No, he's not. No, I mean Councilmember Shade. He's not here.
Yeah. No, sir. He hasn't signed on yet.
Give him a couple more minutes anyway. I apologize to committee members. We got off a little bit long on real estate, which caused us to sign on a little bit late today. Well, let's do this. Let's call the meeting to order. And Mr. Mayor, if you would bring a few words, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would all join me and just take a minute as we reflect on the horrific war that's being engaged in Ukraine, and as we pray for those who are impacted, and we're at the same time inspired by those who are leading Ukraine and those Americans and people from around the world who are doing everything they can to help those that are suffering in Ukraine. Just take an extra 10 seconds of silence and think in prayer for them. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Approval of the minutes, please, from March 7th. Oh, I'm sorry, they deferred. Minutes being deferred. Let's go down to temporary encroachments. Mr. Bryan, anything unusual that you need?
Yes, sir. We have some irrigation and fences. All we have on this time, Mr. Waring. They've all been investigated and recommended for approval. And so we just recommend this information to the committee.
All right, thank you. Thank you a lot. Item G, presentation of third-party reviews for projects.
Mr. Chairman, Tracy McKee is going to take care of that for us.
All right.
Turn it over to Tracy.
Ms. McKee, you up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And bear with me, y'all. I'm a little under the weather, so if I seem a little bit off or more off than usual, maybe I should say, forgive me. So I wanted to talk about third-party reviews a little bit. But basically what I'm really going to be presenting to you is a recommendation for an adjustment to our TRC review fees. But I wanted to give you maybe just a little bit of background of kind of how we got here, and I promise this isn't too long. So this first chart shows the number of TRC submittals by year since 2018. As well as the average days to review a submittal. I think it doesn't look very dramatic, but if you really look at these numbers in the dark blue, from 2018 to 2021, that's basically a 40% increase or decrease in the time it's taken the team to actually do those reviews. So I think that's a significant improvement. Also, in this one, looking at 2019, really focusing to 2021, what are the average number of submittals needed to get a project approved through TRC? You can see in 19 and 20, it was almost 4 submittals an applicant would have to put through TRC in order to get approval. That dropped to 2.1 in 2020. And we're continuing to see that drop and improve, if you will. So a couple of things have happened, right? A number of years, or I think in 2000, it was either 18 or 19, we actually increased the fees. We also did away with what was called a PDF review that basically gave them kind of a free review of TRC. So those are a couple of things that we eliminated, and really the whole team feels like doing those things, really charging the applicant what it costs for us to process those applications, as well as eliminating kind of this not a very good way of assessing whether it was a major or minor comment that sent them into what we were calling PDF land, but they didn't have to pay the fee, really increase the quality of submittals. And we think that that's what we're seeing in this particular chart. Another thing that I was really interested to look at is, and this kind of gets to the third party reviews and why we're kind of here with this. I looked at over the years and by the month, like kind of the average days to review to kind of see what that trend is. And really, if we look kind of at this bottom chart of 2019, I was gone in 2018, so I don't have a really strong memory of, or I don't have any memory, if you will, of what was going on in 18. But in 2019, I remember coming back, and it was, Stormwater was really struggling with their staffing. And you can just kind of see this increase and the impact that it had in those average days to review over the course of 2019. So if I jump to 2020, here in March is when Stormwater was able to hire their development manager. You can see things are really kind of start to stabilize. They kind of go up a little bit, probably people being off. But here we lose people. And you can see the time start to go and increase again. They were able to hire some people. We're starting to see the impact of that immediately. And now public service has had some losses, and we're actually starting to see that impact again. Looking through this with some of the TRC staff, we didn't really expect to see a strong correlation, so we were really surprised when we tried to map this out and see how closely this aligns. So I think that what that tells me is, there really is kind of this real sensitivity to the team and the staffing level and capacity, right? So as soon as we get a shortage of staffing, that has a dramatic impact on our ability to turn these reviews around. I think it's important to know that there might be some factors that aren't necessarily accounted for in those charts and numbers, right? So early on, there may not have been great use of our permitting system, but also these times to review can change based on the type of submittal it is. Some are more complex than others. How many times have they already submitted before? So obviously, if it's a second or third submittal, it's probably going to require less time. And of course, staffing experience also plays into that. Another thing, with all this turnover, once we hire new people, it really takes a while for them to get spun up too. So maintaining that, retention, that institutional knowledge, being able to keep people really becomes important as well. So, but, knowing this, we have this sensitivity, we feel like, how do we have this conversation about third-party reviews and making sure that we try to utilize them in an effective way. So luckily, the team has been amazing, and every time we've utilized third-party reviews, they have a tracking system or a logging system that's basically allowed us to look at how much time it's actually taking for staff to do reviews. And they've actually entered all the third-party reviews that have taken place historically. So we've been able to get a sense of what are we actually getting for these third-party reviews, so that we can really kind of come at this in a way that makes sense. So here you can see this is just a simple dashboard where we've got third-party reviews. So you can see it's an average of 510 minutes per submittal for a third-party reviewer to submit. At the moment, we're only going to be talking about public service utilizing third-party reviews. But I'll kind of poke at that here in a minute as well, why we're doing that. So luckily we have some data on that. It's not a ton of data, but at least it gives us some guidance to start with. So we can see 594 minutes per submittal to do those engineering reviews that were done by third-party reviewers. So as you can imagine, that's also a lot of staff time when we do those. And that's probably why we see such a shift when we do have these vacancies in staffing. So, what does this look like? So I think that this tells me, obviously, well, this gives us some information to how to structure third-party reviews. So what we have right now is public service has a contract, a very small contract, to have some third-party reviews done. And we've heard from a lot of, and I'm sure you all have probably heard from a lot of developers or applicants that are anxious for us to utilize third-party reviews because they understand how sensitive this is to our capacity and resources. So I know this is a lot of text here, but currently Tom has in place basically a $19,000 contract. So I made some assumptions here working with Amy and Matt to kind of figure out how we could approach this in a responsible way, if you will. So with council approval, of course, we've made an assumption that we could extend this to $50,000. What would we get for $50,000 of third-party reviews? We can, because we have some data to back it up, we can estimate it might get us about 330 hours, potentially 33 submittal reviews, or 7% of the total submittals for the remainder of the year. An important thing to know, if we don't adjust fee schedules, we end up subsidizing these reviews at almost $1,000 per submittal. So that's pretty significant. And I think another thing, because it is so reliant on capacity, having third-party reviews, all applicants would benefit. And so it made sense to actually spread out this fee over all the submittals to basically absorb the cost of the third-party reviews. Because really, if we've got that increase in capacity, everyone really wins. And so based off of what we know in the current contract in place, and that assumption that we could extend it to $50,000, the recommendation is we look at adding $110 to each review fee. And basically, we're just looking at the average number of submittals and that $50,000. And spreading it across all the reviews avoids any kind of pay to play or anything like that, where just because somebody can afford it, that they could request an expedited review. We kind of feel like that might not be something that we really want to go down. So a road we don't want to go down. So spreading it out seemed to make a lot of sense.
Ms. McKee, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can you go? Somehow I got a little lost. Go over the 19,000 existing contract.
Sure. Yeah. So right now, Public Service has a $19,000 contract in place with a professional services contract to do third-party reviews. So what Amy and I talked about is that we would go down this path of getting the review fees adjusted. Once we got those adjusted, then we can bring back to you a revised contract, because we know that we'll be getting that income to account for those additional funds, the additional $30,000 to use for review fees.
I'm just curious, do y'all know this yet? You may not know this, but our in-house review costs compared to the outside review costs, is it one and the same? Is outside more or less? Or?
Yeah. So it does cost that's where we end up. We basically charge a $600 review fee,
right?
But it ends up costing us about $1,500 per review when we send them out. That's why, So we subsidize about $900 to $1,000 per submittal if we don't adjust fees.
Right. I got you. Thank you.
Sure. And so this is basically what it would look like. We'd look at adjusting the site plan submittals, PUD submittals, concept plan, and road construction plans. Everything else kind of on the TRC fee schedule would remain the same, but this gets at the meat of those submittals. And I think one thing that's really important, what I would like to suggest is this is kind of let's do this from now till the budget cycle. So when we get into the budget cycle, I think this should be an annual part of the budget. Let's take a look at how we're utilizing third-party reviews. How much did we need them? How much do we anticipate needing them the next year? And we should adjust the TRC review fees to accommodate that annually, and make sure that we keep a watch on it and are adjusting accordingly. And I think another thing to do is between now and the budget process is to maybe look at a different approach, maybe through an RFQ where we can get a larger pool of like quality and qualified reviewers and really understand from that community what would make them really interested in providing this service to the city, because it has been there hasn't been a high amount of interest in providing this service to the city. So how do we make sure that we've really got a good robust quality pool of folks to rely on to do this for us? And I'm happy to try to answer any questions y'all have, and look to Tom and others to fill in the gaps. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. I don't know, Mr. O'Brien, you have anything to add to that before I represent Councilmember Appel?
I think Tracy handled it great. And as she said, our real concern as we look forward going forward with this is to develop a large pool. Interestingly enough, this is kind of in a way almost like overlay work. There's several companies, local engineering and architectural firms that do a lot of the TRCs for people, and they could even themselves could participate in this site pool because they just obviously wouldn't review their own projects. But everybody's using the same standard of our stormwater manual and our engineering conditions, so everybody knows the thing. And I think if we develop like we're talking about, we'll get more interest, and they'll all be happy to hear this. We've spoken to several of them, I think, about the potential to do this. As Tracy said, I think it'll get us a better pool. And this is something we want to adjust accordingly to, because I just, as I know, sure all of y'all get, the mayor, we get calls every day, and time is money in development, and we don't want to hold people up. We want to try and do this as fast as we can. I think that Tracy, the idea we came up with this, and thanks to Amy and Matt from BFRC to helping us do this, but it's really going to be a tremendous thing. And as Tracy said, we kind of have a track record. Several years ago, when stormwater was having the same staffing issues we have, we did it. It was some success, and it made a large difference. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Matt, and also especially Kinsey Holton from our stormwater, because as we helped them when they needed help, they've stepped up tremendously and helped us. And I cannot say enough. We're not perfect, but I will just say our engineering staff is doing the reviews. In December, we had 149 that were past due, and we're down to 41 now. And we have one engineer working full-time. Keith Frazier, who just left us, is doing some part-time work still, even though he started another job. And as Tracy said, we've established this small third-party review. So we're working very hard to do it. And I think this will be a great thing for the development community and move things forward, and for the city, get projects on the tax rolls is what we want to do.
Listen, man, I think it's a wonderful idea. You know, third-party review came up as a topic when Ms. Cabinet was here. So thank you for pushing this forward. And I appreciate you sharing the information on Mr. Kinsey. I needed to hear that. We needed to hear. Okay. So great presentation. Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. And if y'all could please indulge me on this. It's hard to think of a less sexy topic than our development review process and third-party review. But I'm here to tell you, it is a very, very important issue for the city. And want to just thank Tracy and Tom and everybody else at the city, Matt, Amy, et cetera, for their work on this. I know we've had some meetings sort of one-on-one to talk through a lot of these issues. And here's some of the reality here. I represent a lot of developers. I run in these circles with what I do for a living. And here's the reality of it. Charleston has a reputation for being the toughest place to get a project through the development review process. And you may just think to yourself, when I say that, the initial reaction is, oh, well, these, super wealthy hotel developers and tract home developers, they can just deal with it. This is just going to be a rounding error for them. Put that issue aside for a second. They're people too, and they provide an important service to the community. But this issue impacts regular people. I represented a African-American family on Riverland Drive years ago. Y'all may have heard about it. This poor family was trying to subdivide their parcel over there on the Stono River, and it was a absolute nightmare for them. And this touches on equity issues. It touches on affordable housing issues, because when projects are hung up in the development review process, that's a supply side constraint, right? It's preventing housing inventory from getting onto the market in a timely manner. The quicker projects get reviewed and approved and sold, the quicker our tax rolls get updated. There's so many benefits to having a smooth, efficient, high functioning, and effective system. We're not talking about letting people go in under the hood and, under the radar, not complying with our ordinances and things like that. We're just talking about trying to make sure our process runs as efficiently as possible. And I think Tracy's graphic a little bit earlier, where it's tracking the data and the timeliness of these reviews relative to when staff comes and goes, is very instructive, because guys, I think we have to acknowledge the reality of the fact that when you're a professional engineer, or you're a planner, or you're a stormwater engineer, we are not going to be able to pay you what Seaman Whitesides pays you, or what Thompson Hutton pays you. It's just a fact of the matter. So it is going to be a fact of nature and reality that we're going to have these blips up and down into the future. So I think what we need to be moving towards is having a lean, mean, efficient process where we can delegate out to the private sector as appropriate this third-party review. That's what we're talking about. And that'll have benefits for the city's bottom line when it comes to our budget, funding these various departments, things of that nature. There's this discussion about, permit fees and how are we going to fund this third-party review. So bear with me for a second. We've got developers in this city that will pay a fortune to have their projects developed in an expedited manner. Now, you may say, and Tracy alluded to this, pay for play, favorable treatment. This is a conversation I think we need to have. We need to examine the pros and cons of these different things. You go to an airport, you're going on a plane. If you're like me, you go into the line with everybody else. And as I turn to the left, I see all these guys in suits going through the global entry. And I'm always just like, why am I such a, what? There is precedent within government for paying for expedited and enhanced service. And I think there's a way we can do this at the city that allows developers to get, first-class treatment, pay big bucks to do it, have those big bucks go into our stormwater and public works review process to hire more staff, to help subsidize the third-party review for other folks, for regular folks like the clients I had over on Riverland Drive years ago. There's a way to make this work where everybody wins. And I think that is when you talk about cities innovating and becoming more business-like and learning the best features of the private market, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And I think there's a way to structure this properly and do it in a manner that is not pay for play and things of that nature. And again, there's tangible benefits the city gets for allowing these projects to move forward more expeditiously, affordable housing, tax rolls, et cetera. So I think that's a conversation we ought to have head on. The other thing I would say is that some of the feedback I get from the development community is that really everything in the city works pretty darn well currently. There were some issues with legal review that seem to have been addressed by putting the legal process into the InterGov system, which is a great thing that Tracy has done. But it all comes back to stormwater. Stormwater is really where you hear about folks getting hung up in the development review process a lot. So when we talk about doing third-party review, but leaving stormwater out of it, I'm concerned a little bit that perhaps we're missing the mark a little bit on that and not training our sites on the aspect of our development review process that is the most maddening for some. So This is a very, very important issue. As I mentioned, when Tracy and I last spoke, you challenged me to go out into the world and find some engineering firms that would be interested in actually taking on this work. I'll fill you in on some more of the details, but I'm here to tell you that one of the principals of one of the largest civil engineering and landscape architecture firms in the city has assured me that there are plenty of firms that are willing to do this work. It's expensive. I mean, one of the quotes that was thrown out to me was $3,000 to $5,000 per review. You start talking about having a $19,000, $50,000 a year budget. You don't really get that. That's going to go by fast. But I'm here to tell you, there are developers that will stroke the city a check for $5,000 so the city can hire a third party to review their project. That's chump change for a developer in the development review process. That's the per diem on some of these loans. Well, maybe not a per diem, but it's expensive, the carrying costs that these guys incur. So this is a really important discussion to be having. Let's keep the momentum going on it, and it'd be great for us to innovate in this area. Thank you.
All right. Can we pull down the presentation so I can see everybody?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Any other input? Let me add one. Tracy, I saw your hand go.
Yeah, I think, Councilmember Pell has some amazing points. And I think, from where I sit, I think it's great what I'd like to do is kind of get this kicked off with the idea that this is part of the budget process, right? And so how do we, get this started? And then, do we look to have some, expedited reviews and implemented during the next round? And actually, how do we take all these things in? So maybe think of it more as like between now and the budget process starting as like a pilot program, if you will, to figure out how we'll just continuously improve upon it. So.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I've got a couple of maybe bullet points. Again, great presentation. I agree with everything Councilmember Pell said. I actually think when it comes to the city projects, and this is something I've discussed in the past, I think the city projects ought to have a code on it, and let's call it 1670. And I think those projects ought to be expedited. And I'll tell you why. If we slow up our own projects, all we're doing is adding the cost to the taxpayer. Okay. So when it comes to the affordable housing projects, or when it comes to plans like the battery wall and things like that, I think certain things ought to have a expedited, in particular government ought to have expedited on. Second thing is, if you remember before, Mr. Mayor before, and Councilman Seeking before, and Shahid, before COVID, one of the things we did was increase fee income across the board when it came to, in particular, some of our building services and things like that. Fee income is a heck of a profit center for every major bank in the country because they don't have to hire an employee to do it. So increasing the fees could certainly cover our costs makes sense. If it costs $1,500 to review a plan and we collecting $600, I mean, that just doesn't make sense, okay? So hopefully if we can at least use that as a rule to cover our costs when we do that. And when it comes to pay to play, our Regional Development Alliance, which recruits industry into this region, David Ginn and his team up there, they went to pay to play funding mechanism maybe 10 years ago, okay? So, I understand that's we just have to do it hopefully correctly. Not pay to approve, pay to review. It's two different things. So anyway, with those 3 bullet points, but please try to include the city projects as part of being, and I think put a separate code on it. So whoever hits their desk, they will know this is a city project, and as it sits around, every taxpayer pays a little bit more. Do we have any other input from committee members on this? A very good discussion. wasn't boring at all, Councilman McPhail. That said, that was just for information, I believe, Ms. McKee, wasn't it?
Actually, it would really, the big consideration is increasing the TRC review fees that I showed on the fee schedule.
Okay, so we need a motion on that.
I believe so.
The chair would entertain a motion. Is there a motion out there?
So move.
Properly moved and seconded by Councilman McPhail. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item approval for the scope of undergrounding of Archer School. Who's going to address that?
Tracy, you want to introduce, get that going?
Yeah, of course, this is me again. It's the Tracy show.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're doing great for somebody's not feeling good. You're doing great.
Oh, good, because I feel very out of it.
Great.
So, really we brought this Archer School project to y'all a number of months ago now for initial review and approval. And so what we're bringing to you today is really to get your approval on the scope of the project, because we've been able to really kind of hone in on the details of what would be involved for undergrounding for the Archer School and how far we want to take it. And kind of show the easements. And I think that there's a cost estimate with this as well. And so, but basically what this approval does, and Julia, please jump in if I get this wrong. What I believe this does is it allows us to move forward with obtaining the easements for this project, and kind of taking this design even further, if you will. And Joe Apple from Dominion is here to really kind of do a proper introduction into the scope of the project. And Joe, if you're on, I can share the plan if that's helpful, or if you wanted to share it.
Hey, Tracy. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Tracy, if you could go ahead and share that, that would be great.
Absolutely. And I'll do my best to navigate, or zoom in and navigate around as you walk them through.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm operating on an iPhone here. We have the Zoom restricted on our corporate system, so bear with me a little bit as we walk around the project. We first started looking at overhead to underground conversion as part of the redevelopment of the 220 Nassau Street Archer School project. And, we had a meeting on site, and we walked through the entire block and started identifying areas where we could achieve the most impact with the dollars that, for the project. What we came up with has changed slightly from where we were previously, which is why we wanted to talk about it again today. But essentially, there's going to be 2 new transformers to provide service for the project at 220 Nassau Street. Both of those are located on the project site. What we're looking at doing is tying in a transformer down the road at the Martin Luther King Jr. pool. That is one of the easements that is going to be required from the city of Charleston. There's going to be a new underground line coming from Jackson Street down the parking lot to an existing pad-mounted transformer that's already there today. That tying in that transformer is going to allow us to eliminate quite a bit more of the overhead lines as part of the scope of this project. Essentially, everything, Tracy, if you can zoom in on the pool box close to the intersection of Jackson and Nassau Street. So all of the overhead line on along Hanover Street, south of Jackson, will be removed. And then also the overhead line on Jackson Street up to a point just outside the intersection of Jackson and Nassau will be able to be converted to underground. The overhead services to the homes along that block will remain. from a point that is labeled 800 on this print, but the main line, the overhead primary conductors and transformers on the poles will all be removed in that area. Running through the project site as we come back out into the city right away, further up on Nassau Street.
Am I going the right direction for you?
Yes. If you go a little bit planned north. Yes.
Yeah.
So we tie back into our existing overhead system on Nassau Street right there at point 300 with a road crossing at the location. Yep, exactly where you have your cursor. So that will basically complete the 3-phase undergrounding for the transformers involved with the project and again, the Martin Luther King Jr. pool. In addition to that, we also have a small undergrounding scope just to the north at the intersection of Nassau and Harris Street. There's some existing single-phase overhead lines that provide service to the customers and along the Harris Street section of roadway. We plan to install 2 directional bores, one each direction, to new pad-mounted transformer locations that will be on the Charleston Housing Authority property. So that will be the second easement required for this project, or set of easements required for this project. What that will do is eliminate the lines blue color, blue dash color, and refeed those customers from underground. Tracy, was there anything else that you wanted me to touch on?
I think, yeah, I think that covers it. I mean, really, I think that the plan so Joe met with Eric Schultz and Rodney Porter out on site, and we kind of walked through this and talked about how do we maximize the impact to, and potential for this, for expanding undergrounding in the neighborhood without too much project creep, right? So we didn't want it to get too out of control, and I think they did a really good job in trying to maximize the impact without getting too crazy. And so obviously this easement is something that is manageable. It's on our site. Charleston Housing Authority, we don't have the easement in place, but they seem agreeable to this easement. And so really then it's just, cost estimate, which has gone up a little, I guess, because of drainage issue. Is that right, Joe?
Yes, it has gone up since the original estimate that was provided. It's a number of factors playing into that. I would say the primary factor is an increase in our per linear foot cost associated with our overhead to underground projects. And really all we have done at this point on this project is provide an approximate per linear foot cost to try to represent a budget. We have not gotten to the point where we're doing detailed estimating on this, simply because we haven't been had an approved scope up to this point. So that'll be kind of the next step in the process. But the estimated cost is right at $750,000, just using an approximate model based on similar projects, cost per foot. And then like you said, Tracy, there was some addition of some underground drainage on the 220 Nassau Street project, I assume as part of a plan review. And some of that displaced some of the electrical conduit paths that we were planning to utilize for the project.
And then my understanding is that we would want, if you all approve of the scope, we would actually come back to you once the easements are in place before the work begins. Is that right, Joe and Julia?
Yes, that is my understanding.
Okay, this is the first one that I've really been involved with, so bear with me. Any questions?
Any questions? Yeah, I can't see everybody.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I can't see it. Okay, now I can. Any questions from any committee members? Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to thank Joe Apple from Dominion for collaborating with us on this, and of course Tracy and Councilmember Appel remembers the hours we went through getting our new protocol together, which we still on the verge of hiring a project manager to do this on a more regular basis, but the whole point of that allows us to do just what we're doing here today. And that's to include more areas of the city that we feel deserve undergrounding, like affordable housing development, and in neighborhoods that, you know, otherwise would not have been organized enough to propose a project to the city. And it allows us to dip into that fund that we've got sitting there in the bank to do some of these projects. So it's this is just a good example. I hope there's a lot more to come once we get our project manager hired, and they don't happen quickly, but this is a good sign of things to come. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Appel, and all involved with this one. That's a big win. Any other input from committee members? All right. We entertain a motion, please. Anybody has a motion for approval?
So moved.
Okay, properly moved and is seconded by Councilmember Shahid. I believe all in favor of that motion.
That's the second.
All right. I saw your lips moving, but you were muted. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item H, if the committee would allow, let me advance item 5. I don't think that's going to be, hopefully, a whole long discussion. Councilmember Shealy has asked that Lake Donald was on last meeting, and I think he had some updated information from the county and all as to funding, Mr. Mayor, on that one. So if the committee would allow, I'll go the pleasure. Let me go to 5, and then I'll come back and go through 1 through 4. Councilmember Shealy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And I know y'all heard a lot of, about this last week or 2 weeks ago at City Council, but wanted to kind of revamp just real quickly and let you know that, we had a study done 5 years ago. Some of you weren't on council at that time on the Church Creek Basin. It's because floods, had happened multiple times, and Shadow Moss, Hickory Hills, Canterbury Woods, Hickory Farms, Forest Lakes, Crosstown Church, of course, Providence Common. All of those areas had flooded, several times on this. And the study had shown that, Forest Lakes and Providence Commons are actually subject to tidal surges, because Lake Daughter used to flow out into a connection between Church Creek, Lake Daughter used to form a connection between Church Creek and Long Branch Creek, which flowed out into the Stono River, which helped drainage flow through that Church Creek. And when the Glen McConnell Parkway was built, it dammed off that flow between Lake Daughter and Long Branch Creek. Now the lake can currently only flow into Church Creek, but it's only at lower tides, because Church Creek water level is actually higher than Lake Daughter unless it's a lower tide. So that's why when this lake floods, we see homes and cars and roads and yards and everything staying flooded for 4 or 5 days. And because the water's got nowhere to go except in the yards and homes during a storm surge. And then to add to that, Church Creek actually comes over the top of the Rice Gates during those storm surges. So, in the last few years since those floodings, when we have heavy rains predicted, Jason Kronsberg, because it's a city park, sends George Bell out there to manually adjust those Rice Gates at low tide. And I've gone out and helped him adjust those rice gates a couple of times to try to lower the lake. So we have more capacity there in Lake Daughter, but it can only flow out when the tide is lower than Lake Daughter, which really only gives us a few hours a day. So it's a tough thing. And if somebody if something ever happens to George Bell, we're probably going to flood because he's the guy that knows how to adjust the thing. So it's been kind of crazy the last 4 years of this, but bottom line is, this isn't your average draining issue. We've got major flooding. We know how to fix it. We can keep people's homes from flooding in the future. And as the chairman was just saying, I have talked to some of my colleagues, some of my friends that serve on county council, and they're going to try to ask the county if they can pay half of this cost to put the pipes under the Glen McConnell Parkway. And, we got, again, a small window of opportunity to match them to put the pipes under the Glen McConnell Parkway at the same time as the scheduled road construction. And, this will allow for only one disturbance of traffic for people that live down that busy highway. Of course, Banks Construction already put their bid in when they thought it was included in the widening project. They're ready to go with this. And again, this is the worst flooding issue we've got in West Ashley, one of the worst that we've got in the city of Charleston. We got a plan to fix it. We know the first step. This is the first step. If we want to revitalize West Ashley, make progress toward major flooding is certainly one of those issues that we can help to make West Ashley better. So, and I know it's on the Ways and Means Committee tomorrow as well. And it just makes sense to do this all at the same time when the Glen McConnell widening's happening. The county, I think, agrees with that. And, I hope that you'll help me in getting this done. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions of Councilmember Shealy on that, Mr. Mayor? Bell, Shade.
Well,
okay, let's go to the mayor first.
Yeah, I'll confirm. I also spoke with Councilmember Moody and with the county administrator that they will try to match funding on the project. Councilmember Shealy's absolutely correct. It made sense from the very beginning. I'd been talking about this 3 years ago, back when Councilmember Rawl was still on county council. And I know Councilmember Middleton is supportive as well. So if the thing that just paused us really was the funding. And we thought for years now, for some years, that the half-cent county sales tax ought to help cover this expense. And of course, Councilmember Pell, I'm sure, makes the argument that it should. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm just going on what the DOR, Department of Revenue, is telling us. And I don't think you're going to find the county going contrary to what the DOR says. So at this point, if they're willing to come up with 50% of the money, we'll have a presentation later in this program and at a budget ad hoc meeting soon about the overall number of projects out there and priorities and all like that. But I think if we can get a 50-50 match, that we ought to do it. And then what was I going to add? One other thing I can't remember right now, but maybe I'll think of it in a minute.
Hopefully it'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we had the understanding that we have to proceed with the Long Branch
Permitting?
project, before this can have real impact. I was going to ask Matt, I guess on the current construction scenario, they would install the pipes and then cap them off. Was there ever any consideration that they have valves on them that you could control the flow down the road even after it's all completed? Was one question. And the other thing I did want to mention was that we have not paused on proceeding to get permitting for this. I spoke with Matt right after our last meeting and made sure that we were continuing that effort so that, even if we're still analyzing and trying to get the funding together for this. It's not slowing us down at this point in the approval process. Thank you.
All right, good. Councilmember Shahid, I think I saw your hand, and then Appel, and then maybe Bowden. I think I saw your hand too. So in that order, Councilmember Shahid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is sort of the problem we have, as I understand this. If our 50% be equivalent to $1 million for this project, is that correct, Matt?
I think 1.3.
Our 50% is 1.3.
Right.
And then the benefit of that is going to be nothing until when?
Well, Councilman,
If you can answer that for us.
go ahead. Sorry.
Mr. Fountain?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Councilman Shade, the 1.3 would be the 50% match of the construction costs. We still have to finalize permits, probably do the inspection. And normally you'd include a contingency in case something comes up in construction, which we estimate around $3 million for the total amount, which would be 1.5 as a 50-50. The pipes would provide a benefit to Lake Dotterer once the dam at Lake Dotterer is raised, and then the downstream improvements were made under Highway 17, the Greenway, and then there's one more crossing that's a more minor crossing.
And that would take place when?
Depends on funding allocation.
And those projects would cost how much?
So we're still very early in the conceptual stage there. If it does end up being adding a box culvert under Highway 17 and modifying the Greenway to either add additional pipes or potentially a bridge or a short bridge, and then the work on Lake Dotterer, probably on the order of $20 million is probably about what we'd be looking at. It's a little early. I mean, it could be cheaper if it is much easier under Highway 17 than we think it will be. But if it ends up being an open cut on 17 or which I don't think DOT would allow. So if we end up having to ramjack box culvert under 17, it's probably going to be on the order of $20 million.
So when do we have to make this commitment for this?
There's a couple of options. If we wanted to move forward with the installation exactly as is for the $2.6 million, I'd have to double check on the exact. I think it's 18 months from the notice to proceed on that one, which the notice to proceed went out, I think, last month. Before it's basically too late to require the contractor to install under the contract pricing. There is a slightly separate option in that the pipes are being what's called basically ramjacked or jack and board under Highway 7 or under Glen McConnell, which is a method where you don't open cut the road down as a trench to put the pipes in. They're too deep to do that and leave the lanes open. So they're actually being basically, it's kind of like drilling them. It's just a different method than drilling. It's called a trenchless technology. The work that does require lane closures and cutting on Glen McConnell are the utility relocations, which are about $300,000 most likely of work. There's an electric line that needs to be moved, a water line that needs to be moved, and some older CWS lines that need to be abandoned, that are abandoned. They just need to be removed and abandoned. So that work you would have to do during the construction project to avoid future lane closures. Otherwise, Councilman Shealy is exactly right. You'd come back and have to reclose lanes again for a future project. The boring of the pipes under the road technically can happen at any time, but if we want to do it under the county's contract, it needs to happen in the next 18 months or so.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So listen, I want to help out Councilmember Shealy's constituents as best we can. And I understand in the presentation we had last time on this meeting was eye-opening. But this is sort of the problem I'm having with all this. I've got a similar situation that I've been working with Mr. Fountain's department even before we created the stormwater department. This could be about a $2 million project. And these folks have been waiting for 5 years for that to be funded. And it may not have the total number of impact that this will have eventually on Councilmember Shealy's area, but it is important to these folks. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to prioritize these things. We're going to have this discussion in front of the ad hoc budget committee at some point. And if we can wait until we can put this all into a pool to make that decision, because quite frankly, I don't want to spend $1.5 million that's going to take away from the project that I've been working on for a number of years, and provide those folks an opportunity, which is going to provide them immediate relief once that project is up and running and completed. And that's something that we can get done pretty soon. So I don't want to shut those folks off. And we said at the council meeting last, we've got a limited pool, and we've got to somehow come up with a priority on how to take care of all of the projects that we are interested in and advocating for our constituents.
Let me see if I can help you out with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be able to accommodate Councilmember Shealy's constituents at the same time, but I've got a priority with my constituents first with this. I think you froze, Councilmember Waring. You still there?
Oh, he did.
No.
I think Keith is frozen in time. Can somebody, you next to him on the Hollywood Squares, Ross, would you still like punch him? Maybe he'll
I mean, y'all ready for me?
Well, I hate for Councilman Waring not to be on.
Or Councilman Waring, geez. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Hey, Councilman Waring, you froze up on us.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I guess the internet didn't like what I had to say. But anyway, we've been pigeonholing money for big projects for a long time. I would say as long as Councilman Seekins been on council, we've been putting money aside for the battery wall. I believe there's a way to fund your project. We'll find a way to do it. Just as I remember the $6 million that we putting in Councilmember Appel's project over there. It's been needed for a long time, and we all worked together, and we appropriated those funds. In this case, this is a rounding error. You're talking about 1.3 million. It's a rounding error on any major drainage project that you've talked about. Don't bring up September Clock Crosstown. What is that? We're up to now 198 million, Mr. Fountain, on that. In this meeting, we're going to approve the bonding for, what is it, 38 million or something, Councilmember Seekins, for the battery wall. This one is, we get to build a piece of infrastructure in as we continue down, hopefully in improving the watershed going to the Stoner. Do we have the money for that yet? No. But I'm willing to bet you're doing a storm event, which we know they're coming, we just don't know when. But this can somehow eventually prove beneficial. So, if it was a bigger number, I hear you on that. But then this one, drainage project, is kind of rounding area. Councilmember Shealy, you had your hand up, but let me go to some people who hadn't had a chance to speak.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Chairman Waring. And Councilman Shealy is not somebody who likes to cry wolf. If you've noticed around here, he's the strong, silent type most of the time. So when he raises his hand and says, "I need something and I need help," it's serious, because he's not someone who's gratuitous with his asks around here. So I am 100% on board with doing what we need to do to address this problem up there. And I don't know the first thing about Lake Dotterer, but I take your word for it that you've looked into these issues. Clearly you have. Councilman Waring raised some great points when we were talking about funding some drainage projects downtown, maybe a year ago or so. And the point of it is, in essence, is we have limited dedicated stormwater funding resources, either through the drainage fund or the stormwater utility fee or whatever the case may be. So when there are opportunities to get some money out of a TIF district, or to get some money from Charleston County or a federal, program somehow or the other, we got to take it because that frees up that $1 million for Councilman Shade, or
Right.
for 7 of us split across that $1 million. And I promise I'm not going to belabor this too long, but I am here to tell you today, the Charleston County, our friends over at Charleston County, are planning to spend over $300 million in half-cent sales tax money on 526. 526 is not in any of the ordinances that were adopted by County Council to approve those funding measures. So the idea that this project that Councilman Shealy wants to move forward with is somehow not an appropriate funding project for this half-cent sales tax dollars does not make sense. I have an extraordinary amount of respect for the general counsel of the DOR. I went to law school with him. He's probably one of the smartest lawyers in the state. But there is an incongruency here between Charleston County and their position on this. They have a totally different funding scenario than we have when we're talking about our stormwater resources versus their half-cent sales tax funds. I think someone referred to this as a rounding error a minute ago. This is a rounding error for Charleston County on the Glenn McConnell contract and things of that nature. So I'm encouraged that we've had some progress from our last council meeting. We've gone from 0 to 50%. That's great. I just really think that we ought to, really kind of have a frank conversation about this with the county, really, putting these 2 projects on the table and having somebody, I need to understand how the county is squaring that circle. I just think it's fair. I think it's only fair. And frankly, I don't know enough about the DOR's role in this program to know whether or not what the DOR says is the final word on this, or if it's more akin to an attorney general opinion. We've had some discussion about over at council last several meetings, because if this can be funded through half-cent sales tax dollars fully or much more substantially than is on the table right now, that comes at the benefit of everybody here. And I think that we ought to have a full and open and frank dialogue about that, because the thing that bothered me about this at the last council meeting is I don't want people to be misled about what's going on when it comes to these funding mechanisms. And it shouldn't be a different story when we're talking about Glenn McConnell and Lake Dotterer than it is when we're talking about 526. There just needs to be some consistency in that approach. And, if the counties decided they don't want to spend $300 million on the half-cent sales tax money on 526 because of this letter from the DOR, then I will shut up about this. And there won't be a problem. There won't be a conflict, but there's a conflict here, and I need to be, someone's got to explain to me what makes those 2 projects different. So with that said, we'll keep rolling.
Councilman Patel, your point is well taken. I support you in that. I agree. The mayor brought up when we first started this conversation that everybody out there isn't in the city of Charleston, and that resonated with Councilmember Moody and others to come to this 50%. But I agree with you. I think all of it should come out of it. I'm gonna go to Councilmember Bowden and then Seekings next, and then Councilman Shealy. I'll come back to you. Councilmember Bowden, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It eases my heartburn about this a bit that the county would, consider kicking in 50%. I think that would be extremely helpful. I will say it does concern me just a bit that, the plans aren't quite in place for the rest of this project, which is actually going to make the difference. But while Glenn McConnell's being done, I drive that way every day, and I don't think anything anybody said has resonated with me on council more than when Councilmember Shealy vocally adamantly opposed affecting traffic on that road twice. That is just not something that's going to work. So I do think the urgency is there for this project. But I just wanted to quickly ask a question about the permitting process. Are there like 2 separate permitting processes that we're talking about? So we're talking about moving forward with permitting while we're figuring out the money piece on the Lake Dotterer part. And then are there separate permits that need to be in place for the Long Branch Creek part of this?
Mr. Fountain, can you address that?
Yeah, I can, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So there's an existing encroachment permit with DOT for the Glen McConnell pipe work, as well as it being incorporated into the stormwater permits and other varying permits for the linear part of the Glen McConnell widening construction. There is not yet a USACE or Army Corps of Engineer impact permit because it's basically being installed in Army Corps jurisdictional areas. The Army Corps' primary concern has been the considerations of that overall project. That's where the offer has been to try to install the pipes plugged to see if the Corps will agree to that approach, which they've said they might. They're considering that. We do need to finalize the contract with our consultant to finalize that Corps permit, which is what the mayor was talking about. We've asked the consultant to give us a final scope and fee to do that. Separately, there would be a separate set of permits for the work under Highway 17, the Greenway, both from an environmental perspective as well as from a DOT encroachment perspective. In the Greenway, you'd have a combination of CWS and city permitting. So yes, the ecological permitting for Long Branch is likely to be pretty extensive, and so is obviously the 17 encroachment permit, but that's a separate process, assuming the Corps doesn't come back and require all of that in advance of the pipe installation, which we don't think they will.
Okay. Councilman Seekings and then Shealy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things just really quickly. First, I agree wholeheartedly that if we can pull together the resources that we ought to put in this piece of infrastructure, even if it won't be immediately beneficial, it's certainly a lot better than going in and retrofitting it later when it's needed and paying all that cost. So we need to do it. My question is this, and maybe Mr. Mayor or Councilmember Shealy, you can shed some light on this. My understanding is there's been a commitment from the county to go seek a matching amount of money for this, but there's no guarantee. It still have to go through the process, right? Are we tomorrow, when we take the Civil Ways and Means, going to be asked to approve a full funding source for this and then look to the county to match it half? Or are we only going to vote for half in hopes that the county will somewhere down the road match that money?
Councilman Shealy, your request on Ways and Means.
Yeah, I think the idea is, Councilman Seekings, to ask that we spend up to 1.3, which is about half, assuming that the county would come up with the match, basically. Okay. Would be my ask.
But that they still have to go through a process. I take it through either some stormwater fee allocation or budget readjustments to come up with that money.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
From my understanding, some of the council members have talked to some of the staff, and they they have an idea, and I think there's several of them that are pretty solid on this.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to support it, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, Councilman Shealy.
Just based on what Councilmember Seekings just asked, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. So the motion that we're considering is matching the county's commitment towards this project.
My understanding is the bid price was, I think, 2.6 million, thereabouts, or almost 2.6, not billion, million, I'm sorry. And 50% is what the request was. The county, they hadn't approved it. Councilman Seeking is right. A lot of conversation. My understanding is a potential majority of votes around county council on this one, if we were to come up with a match of the 2.6 million. Now, one thing Mr. Fountain just brought up, which is, he's right. All these projects have contingencies, and I don't know whether contingency was already in that 2.6 number or not, but Mr. Fountain shakes his head no, so I believe that's right. So anyway, right now it's 1.3 million that's going to be on the, I think it's already advertised on our agenda. Mr. Fountain.
The chairman, I just wanted to mention, yes, the 2.6 is the actual bid amount from the construction company, as Councilman Shealy had mentioned, which is the advantage of that is, the bid amount. The disadvantage is it doesn't have a built-in contingency item because it's not the project budget. We did I actually just got a text from Mr. Kirk, who's been managing the project. We did get a proposal back from Weston Sampson to finalize the permitting. Their current proposal, which we could negotiate with them, is for 70,000. And then we would need to straighten out who would do inspection. So just from a bookkeeping perspective, just making sure we authorize enough money to be able to finish those tasks as well as the council.
Okay, given the time frame with the county, moving forward with this project, Mr. Fountain, what do you recommend to us? I mean, obviously, you got more updating with, for example, the information you just gave us. So.
Recommend from a allocation amount perspective.
That's right. Contingency, what you just got from Mr. Kirk, etc.
Yeah, I would say the 1 point say basically with the county providing a $1.3 million match, the city would put in the $1.3 million construction match. And then I would recommend allocating roughly an additional $400,000 as contingency, the engineering, the $70,000 engineering fee, and then we'll have to figure out the inspection to see if the county will cover that as part of their project work, or if we don't need it. We may not need that contingency. In that case, it comes back into the drainage fund if there's not an issue during construction. But if they, find an unknown utility line or have some other situation that occurs, you don't want to have the project stop in its tracks because there's no funding for it.
Right. Councilman Seekings?
Just very briefly, Matt, it seems to me if this is a county project and they're going to put some matching funds in for this, wouldn't they naturally be the ones to go in and inspect it? It would be sort of inefficient for us to have to send an inspection team in there just to look at one very small part of a very large project.
You are absolutely right, Councilman, and we will certainly advocate for them to incorporate it into their inspection contract. I haven't had that conversation with them yet because they hadn't offered that matching component.
In defense of Councilmember Shealy, I think we need to try to limit the sticker shock that council is going to hear tomorrow on all this. And we start building add-ons and add-ons and add-ons, it becomes real money all of a sudden on top of the 2.6 divided by 2 that we're looking at.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that that's very clear what we're doing here.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
If the project is 2.4 million, or if it's 3 million, or if it's 8 million, whatever that number is, we're matching what the county's chipping in. We're not going to pick up any extra expenses on doing this.
Well, what we're voting on tomorrow is a $1.3 million match.
Right.
Okay, hopefully, that's what we're voting on. Okay, now we have to come back. That's one thing. One thing that Councilman Appel has said, and I appreciate him being the town cry on this. This piece with the half-cent sales tax, it's going to show its face again on another project. This isn't going to be the only project where county half-cents money is going to come through, and we subject to get the answer back. The DOR says we can't do it. I think that question has to be answered. And maybe this is the project. There will be other projects that can fall in that gray area. Mr. Mayor.
So I'm not defending their decision whatsoever, but just to add a little context.
Yes, sir.
The pipes under Glenn McConnell were not part of the road widening project originally. And the half-cent sales tax does allow for drainage improvements that are associated with a roadway project to be a part of the project. But I think their interpretation of this particular matter was that since this was a quote add-on request, and it may be they should have put the pipes in 20 years ago and all like that, but it wasn't a part of the widening project. I think that's part of why they of what their reasoning behind their decision. For what it's worth, Department.
Okay, I agree with you. I don't think any of us agree with their ruling, but I think that's going to push forward. But anyway, let's. I think we've spent enough time on this one here. Yes, sir, Mr. B.
Well, let me just add one comment. I'm totally comfortable with us, the city of Charleston, fully, moving forward with the $70,000 to make sure we get the permit. But I would respectfully ask the county to split the rest of it, no matter what the other inspection or contingency cost would be. So I think we ought to come up with some reasonable estimate for that and say that You know, we will approve one, we'll pay for the 70 and then we'll put up 1.4 or 1.45 or whatever. That would be a 50% match on the total project cost. Does that sound like a reasonable approach? That way we ask that the county share any additional costs or contingency with us.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
I think they ought to pay for any additional amount.
They should be paying for all of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think they ought to be. We're paying our part right now, Mr. Mayor. I think that's gracious, but Councilmember Appel's got a very good point on this thing, man. I hate to keep going back on that, but we've been asked. Listen, I'm presiding, so I'm gonna follow the majority with the votes come out on this. I agree with your point. I don't want us to be the hold up on this one. I know I hear that coming from you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you. What is the pleasure on behalf of the committee? Let's put a motion on the floor and then continue the discussion if you'd like. Does anybody have a motion to put on the floor when it comes to this so we can move this along?
Well, procedural, I have a question, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this is on our Ways and Means Committee agenda for tomorrow, right?
Right, it is.
So, I mean, I guess any motion would be a recommendation out of this committee back to Ways and Means for their
correct.
consideration.
You're right.
Well, Councilmember Shealy, what would you like that motion to look like, seeing as this is your baby and in your district?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're going to need at least the 1.3, you know, but I guess we need to include any other expenses that may come up associated with that, I guess. You know.
Why don't we do, if you don't mind, I asked Mr. Fountain's insertion on this, kind of like what the mayor said. Why don't we do 1.3 and base the contingency on the 1.3, Mr. Fountain? That would be the addition, I guess, going forward to Ways and Means. You're right, Councilman Seeking. The 1.3 is already on Ways and Means.
Right.
Councilman Bowden has his hand.
I'm sorry, I'm not a numbers guy, but I'm under the impression that we were saying we would need more than 1.3 to cover the contingencies, cover the permitting. I was hearing what sounded like at least 3 million for this for the full scope of the project.
Yeah, for the full scope.
That's sort of the basis we should be going on, at least 1.5.
Okay. Mr. Fountain, you are expert on this one. Now, it's unfair to you because you don't have hard numbers in front of you. So that's kind of unfair.
So, Mr. Chairman, I agree. You'll need the 1.3. You'll need at least 70,000 likely for the final permitting, which we could bring as a separate motion for that contract, because we'll have to bring that contract through anyway. It doesn't necessarily have to be included in the original. You have to be aware that you're committing to that money if you move forward with the 1.3 match. The contingency, I mean, it you know, from a best governance's practice, I would certainly recommend you include the contingency in your funded allocation to be aware that that might be required. You're not technically required to allocate it, but you need to be aware one way or another that it may cost additional money if something goes sideways. Typically, contingency numbers are lower once you have a bid construction contract than they are obviously before you bid. But there's always a chance with the permitting still holding out there that something changes slightly with the permitting.
So your recommendation to us, given that information, is what? Tomorrow.
I mean, if you want to be conservative, I would say the 1.5, assuming a county match of 1.5, either through money or in-kind services. You know, if they provide some of the 1.3 million cost match and then the inspection services, for instance, on the work.
All right. Now is there a motion, given the information we've been provided with?
Move that we recommend through the Ways and Means the 1.3 million plus a 15% contingency.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any more discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All in favor, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
But it's been a good exercise, and let me tell you, Councilmember Seekins.
Well, just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, this meeting's gone on a lot longer than I think any of us anticipated on this
Yeah,
item.
you're right.
And so I'm going to have to apologize and sneak out here yet again on this. But I do think that Councilmember Pell's sort of impassioned plea on this has got some merit to it. And I can see, with all due respect to Councilmember Shealy, this is a very important project for him, but relative to the world in infrastructure, it's not a huge add-on portion of what is a pretty big project, right? And this whole notion of what we can and can't use half-cent transportation sales dollars for should not be lost on this. And just because we get told no, I think we need to sort of gear up our legal team to at some point go out and test the waters on this, because among the projects, if I can just finish, if you don't mind, Councilmember, among the projects that we're going to talk about eventually, maybe not in full tonight, but it's Calhoun West, right? And you know, that is not specifically listed in the half-cent sales tax referendum that's out there, but clearly one of the places we store water and it's going to need to be addressed is the streets of the city of Charleston, particularly downtown in the Calhoun West region. And there's no way we could ever do that project without massive help from, among other people, the county and the tax dollars that are collected in the city of Charleston through the half-cent sales tax. And I think anybody logically would tell you, if we're going to go tear up part of Calhoun Street and build pumps at the end of Calhoun Street and do all sorts of things to clear it and free it up for water so people can get to the hospital, people can take low country rapid transit, people can get all over the place. We're going to have that battle sooner rather than later, because we just can't let it sit out there and wait for the big project and then to spend half a decade at the Supreme Court over it. So I don't want to add a workload to our legal team, but I think it's something that we need to think about going forward as to how the interplay and what role the DOR has, which I suspect Councilmember Pell is fairly large in how we spend monies that are collected through any kind of tax revenue, whether it's a tax revenue via referendum or not. So anyway, I think it's important that we keep that on our radar, because we got some big projects coming down the road. Big. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Pell, I see that index finger.
Thank you. Just real quickly, and thank you, Councilman Seekings, for sort of throwing some support behind this idea. Do y'all know if city council members can request attorney general opinions? We've talked about that around here lately. Maybe that's something we ought to do, because I agree with Councilman Seekings. It's a big deal that's going to pop its head up over and over in potentially all of our districts. And it's an important legal issue that frankly, this region needs some guidance on, not just for this matter, but for future matters.
There's going to be others, no doubt about it. But you think we ought to try to talk first before doing that? I think we ought to try to, we got 3 lawyers on this, 4 lawyers on this in this committee. So, and can we get maybe just a sit down with our legal people and their legal people, Mr. Mayor, and just kind of, in light of projects that are yet to come through, but will be coming through, this same question of what was listed on the referendum and what money's actually being spent on. I think it'd be good if we can sit down and have a discussion and then see where we go from there. What do you think about that, Mr. Mayor?
Well, let me talk with our counsel about that, if you don't mind.
Okay, great. Yeah, I meant not today, but I mean,
and Wilbur as well,
right.
Because I don't want to throw any water on an important project in the future, if you catch my drift.
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah.
And I do believe as I mentioned before, that if a roadway project includes drainage features along with it, that is not a problem. So I hear you loud and clear. I just I don't want to create any
Anyways, I believe me, we are allies in the area, so I'm with you on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for all your input on that. Now we go back to Calhoun West. Mr. Fountain.
Mr. Chairman, did you want me to move with Kellen West or with Councilman?
Yes, sir.
Having
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna have to cut out, Mr. Chairman.
Well, would
pretty
you mind
quick.
if we put that for next meeting, Councilman Seeker?
That'd be great if you would do that. I think Councilmember Boyd was interested in listening in and he had to cut out too. So
Oh, I'm
if we
sorry.
don't,
Well,
and I hate to keep putting this off, but it's
No.
5:11.
I kind of jumped. Well, I'll make sure that'll be number one on the agenda the next time.
Matt, is that okay with you?
That's absolutely fine, Councilman Seeker.
Okay, thank you for being so accommodating.
Thank you for being understanding, Councilman. Mr. Fountain, we're going down to number 2, update on all these wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just shift my presentation quickly. There it is. Okay. Sorry, I had my Calvin West presentation up. I had to find my other presentation. Here it is. Let's see. Just have to share it. All right, DuPont Wapu. This will be relatively brief, Mr. Chairman. I think your main interest, if I recall correctly, was Orleans Woods portion of the DuPont Wapu update. So we did do quite a bit of follow-up work in this neighborhood, looking for both short-term work we could do and then also potential small project work. There's a whole series of notes on here that are somewhat challenging to read at scale. But basically, we completed a full cleaning of the large open ditch system that sort of runs to the rear of the properties on Taborwood. Went through with the hand clean crews and took out as much debris and trash and other accumulation as we could to get that working the best we could. We also did do some work with the Vector trucks to clean out some of the roadside pipes, some of the larger canal pipes. And then we went back and in red basically looked at improvements we could make under the small project work.
Right.
We're pretty sure there's some of the larger pipes in the area we could probably do some contract cleaning on, which we actually have some IDC contract cleaning money that we could use outside of even the small project work. And then we found a few driveway pipes and a few of the culvert, the crossroad culvert pipes that would stand to be upgraded and provide some benefit that we could look at as a small project work. So we're going to come back to y'all with the small project request and including basically what you're seeing in red on this, in addition to the hand clean work we already did and the contracted pipe work that we've got scheduled for cleaning out in this area.
Okay.
That's kind of this short area. Of course, DuPont Wapu, I think we're mostly familiar with the projects we had talked about, projects 1 through 4, what we're working through right now. Projects 1, 3, and 4, which really involve the Epic Center Citadel Mall property. We've basically been going back and forth with the Epic Center. They did produce a model with some ideas for their redevelopment requirements on the property in return for sort of formalizing some of the easements that do exist, but there's certainly some contention about the quality of the easement dedication. We finished that review with AECOM and have to now get back with the Epic Center to see where we are with finalizing that negotiation. But I think we're getting there with the property acquisition part, which is always the one of the lengthiest components of any major capital project. Right. So again, just if you had any details, area 1 was kind of that tie-in from Hazelwood, Taborwood area back into the Citadel Mall property. Area 2 with these are really the Plastis properties on the south end. We're still working through negotiations with that property owner. That's going to be a little longer lasting, I think. Then area 3, we've been looking with the Citadel Mall at basically making this an open channel section through the backside of the mall, turning into a full-scale drainage canal. And then the mall would look, so you kind of move down towards between area 3 and 4, potentially adding in like a large floodable green space as an amenity on the property as part of their requirements for redevelopment of the property. So that I think that would be great from both redevelopment and stormwater perspective. The modeling seems to hold up that's pretty good and would have that benefit. So we just need to now kind of finalize our negotiations and make sure we're all on the same page. So certainly made a lot of progress. We're not there yet, but the negotiation and property acquisition is getting there.
Okay, Mr. Fountain, can you forward those drawings to me, email?
Yes. Yeah, I can send you. I'll send you the detailed one for kind of the Hazelwood Taborwood area.
Right,
So have that
right.
read a little bit easier.
Now, the Hazelwood, it was on the, I think 84, Davis Floyd report to put larger pipes going through there. What's the status on that?
So that's the cross pipes under the roads are what we showed as potential small project upgrades.
Right.
The larger work to connect that large canal through the Citadel Mall property, that is the kind of phase projects 1 and 3 in the DuPont WAPU improvements that AECOM's designing right now. And that the restrictions are mostly along Orleans Road and then on the back side of the mall. So those are in design currently, design and permitting. We're just trying to finalize the negotiation with the property owner at the mall for the kind of the hardest part of the project, which is always the easement acquisition.
Okay. All right. Let me, I appreciate all that work. I'll circle back with you individually on that as far as, taking up more time today, but I thank you so much for doing all those things.
And we will prepare the small project requests, which we should be looking at as a committee in the next month or so also for you to look at in that area.
And let me do this. If we could, let's put Cooper Jackson, unless there's some objections, onto the next agenda as well. And discussion on current stormwater capital improvement project allocations and the drainage fund allocation. Aren't we going to have a workshop soon, like next month?
We are. So, Mr. Chairman, the workshop will be with Budget Ad Hoc. So this was just a chance for the Public Works Utilities Committee to sort of see what Budget Ad Hoc would talk about and see if there was any projects missing from the list or any input they wanted to have to the Budget Ad Hoc Committee.
Okay. When is the Budget Act? Are we going to have one more Public Works before the workshop?
I know Ms. Wharton was looking at scheduling it for early April, so it's not certain that we'll have one.
Well, then let's move forward with. Well, let me see Councilmember Shaheed hand. Yes, sir.
So I was going to ask Mr. Chairman that since we're going to look at this at the ad hoc section, if it just makes sense if Mr. Fountain can email to us what that list is.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty good idea what is on there.
I think it's a great suggestion.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if anyone will be able to follow the spreadsheet just by an email. I can do it really quick if you'd like, though, Mr. Chairman. It's I don't mind emailing it out afterwards, but it's a hard thing to follow.
Is this an engineer's flow chart, Mr. Fountain, or a lawyer's flow chart we're gonna be looking at?
Yeah, it's more like an accountant's flow chart, perhaps.
Well, let's do this. We'll
go ahead. I'm ready to go ahead.
You move forward and email it, okay? Let's do that.
I can certainly email it as a follow-up, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll try to move through it very quickly. And if there's questions, that way you can always reach out to me later about it. So just one quick presentation from context. This isn't part of our graph. This is out of the basically the St. Louis Federal Reserve branch showing some of the inflationary issues in the last couple of years. So this graph is starting in March of 2020, and this is industrial building construction, which is certainly not a perfect corollary to any of our projects, but it has many of the same features you would see in a heavy duty civil construction project. So you can see we were seeing an uptick, but nothing excessive in inflation up to about May 2021. And then from May 2021 to current day, they're showing almost a 17% construction inflation in this industry. So again, not a perfect corollary, but just something to be cautious about as we're allocating funds, that there is a lot of uncertainty in projects that are not through the bidding process yet right now. These numbers do come down sometimes, interestingly, as well, because some of the supply chain issues do get relieved, but like concrete pipe right now is anywhere from 12 weeks to 26 weeks, depending on what kind of concrete you're buying, just to get your concrete pipe on site. So it's And it's due to the reinforcing steel. It's not due to the concrete. It's the reinforcing steel that's causing the issues. But just as an awareness, it's a little nerve-wracking right now for everybody who's trying to estimate project budgets, and you're going to get a lot of scared engineers when they're trying to come up with opinions. Contractors who are bidding on those projects as well feel the same way, which when you have uncertainty, it raises price is what happens. So just this is not about that, especially. I just want to throw that in. This is about just very briefly running through the existing allocations that council has authorized from different funding sources into drainage oriented projects. And I'll send out the sheet again because it's a lot of stuff. But basically what it shows is it'll list the project, say what's currently been allocated in the sheet and where that allocation is from. So for instance, Barbary Woods out of the drainage fund has been allocated $7,151,198 by council. Design work, and then it'll have by year. So things that happened before this year, basically, I just sort of summarize them to keep it from being an impossible spreadsheet. And we could talk about any one of these projects in sub spreadsheets for an hour if anyone wants more detail. I just am trying to keep it from being crazy and overwhelming. Then we'll have like a design column that says what we're spending or estimating on design. And then separate columns for like Barbary Woods is unusual and it has a major property acquisition, which most of our projects don't. Construction CEI, which is just the inspection work for construction. These are total costs, and then the blue highlighted will be areas where if you were to proceed with the project as designed and as planned, what additional amount of money would be needed. So this is not, you don't need 3.5 million plus 777,000. You need 3.5 million that year, 777,000 of which is not currently allocated, just for clarity on how the sheet reads. The color coding and then the sheet on the side do kind of list what funds are most likely for that project if you were to allocate. So this is how this one is set up. Ms. Wharton will come back with where the actual drainage fund itself stands for allocation amounts. I'm just trying to give you a sense of where the currently allocated budgets are. So here we go through Church Creek and we have again our grants. Church Creek has some unfunded allocation amounts for the flood storage work that we're doing, but there is the TIF that's available. So that's why it's in green rather than being funded out of the drainage fund. I would assume that would likely be a TIF funded project to preserve the drainage fund. We go through the Concord.
Go back to that. I know Ms. Wharton's probably gonna update us on that, but do we know how the revenues are coming into the TIF out there at Church Creek?
She has had an update, and it looks like the mayor probably has even more information than I do. He just raised
okay, all right, good.
Well, I just got the one number that she indicates we should be able to bond about $4 million this year based on what's happened so far for that TIF district. And Mr. Chairman, if I may ask a question for clarification.
Yes, sir.
So just using that Barbary Woods for an example, you've got 7.1 allocated, and by the time it's all done, you end up being 777 short one year and $3.5 million short the other year. So total the project's about $4.2 million short right now based upon your projection. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mayor.
Okay, gotcha.
And so that one, for instance, with Barbary, I think we have always looked at trying to leverage city dollars into potentially a NIFWIF grant. So whether or not you choose to fund it out of the drainage fund or whether you wait for potential grant funding, like those are options that council has. You don't have to allocate it in. We can sit on the construction with a shovel-ready project with land acquired, thinking it's a good grant candidate. I'm just trying to make sure we understand where we are on each individual project.
Understood. Thank you.
So then we have Church Creek, which I'll send out the spreadsheet so everyone has it and they can spend more time looking at it. But again, shows some of the expected shortfalls in the currently allocated funding, which we think will be able to close that gap with the TIF without any issue, which is the purpose of the TIF. The Concord pump station upfit is one of the most unknown ones that lines up the tightest with that industrial building inflation I just showed you, which is where that one's a CMAR, so we're going to bring in an actual contractor and work through our construction costs. but there is some real uncertainty on that one. And I'm trying to lay that out in the sheet of saying, be careful on some of these, that they are likely to be more expensive than we would have thought a year ago when that CIP was last updated.
So is that station just wearing out, or what is it?
It is. It's a little bit over 20 years old, Mr. Chairman. It's the original pumps, and the pumps that we have in there are no longer supported or manufactured, and they basically need to be replaced.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to replace pumps while keeping the pump station running, as well as all the electrical and mechanical. So it really needs to be done because it's a huge area that it feeds to.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be expensive. We shouldn't need that kind of investment again for another 20 or 25 years, but it's,
right.
It's one of the downsides of pump stations is they do require some
well, I remember the area before we had the pump station.
Yes. Yeah. Then it was underwater a lot of the time. So Cooper Jackson here, this is the east side work. Again, we're expecting a borrowing out of that Cooper Bridge TIF to be able to support this funding. That's also in very early project stages. Actually, the presentation that we'll have the next meeting is to basically launch us into our actual design and permitting work now that we've done the concept and the outreach work in the neighborhood, and it seems to be pretty well supported. Earhart. So there's no lack of funding in Earhart at this point. The numbers came in pretty well from the bid. We just approved all that at council. I mean, it does have drainage fund money in it, about $7.9 million, including the money we've already spent, the $973,000. But that one seems on track. Forest Acres, Mr. Chairman, this is one where the construction inflation has our consultant very concerned, and they think there might be as much as $2.7 million of additional cost from when we budgeted about a year and a half ago because of all the box culvert that's going in, which again, reinforcing steel and concrete is one of the challenges right now. So we'll likely need to allocate into that one in the short run, since we're going to be going out. We literally went out for bid either today or tomorrow. It's going out on the street for construction bidding.
So how much of the money on that? We still have money out the 2012 bond to fund it?
We do. So we've, the original bond allocation was about 15.5. We've spent 12.6 of that on the original construction and on the design for the current phase. So there's roughly $3 million of the existing bond left on that project. And then we'll have to add in some additional funding to close that gap.
Okay. All right.
King and UG phase 1 and phase 2. Again, we've applied for HMGP and BRIC grants on this project, but we do still have likely a shortfall about $4 million. We actually have our BAR submission this Wednesday, so we'll know more once we start getting back info from the BAR on what level of aesthetic upfit they'll require for the property. But our architects had some great ideas trying to keep that cost as low as possible.
Great.
Market Street we could talk about, but I don't think we need to necessarily in great detail. Again, when you're talking about unknowns, that's one of the hardest for budget estimating, but we're working through undergrounding with Dominion right now. So we'll have more information by the end of the year on that. Low Battery, we've talked about. I'm showing it unfunded here because we haven't technically approved the hospitality bond, but obviously that's on the council agenda, and it is a likely way to close that funding gap. Phase 4 Spring Fishburne with the Infrastructure Bank and King Street Gateway TIF funding. Phase 5 Spring Fishburne with the Infrastructure Bank and King Street Gateway TIF funding. And then the Windermere project, which again, this one is a twofold. There's about 4.6 million currently allocated. We're expecting about $3 million of increase. Some of that is due to inflation. A lot of that is actually that the original plan was for a single outfall addition behind the school, which the school district seems to be pretty supportive of. But the detailed modeling came back and recommended a major upfit along William Ackerman as well on the existing outfall because of all the blockages we've had from sewer crossings. So that's a change to the scope, likely scope of the project. We haven't, none of this is finalized, but that's where we're expecting to see a bogey out in 2024 for construction costs. Down here, so this is where I'm trying to wrap summaries in a little bit. So there's a sense of scale, what we're spending on projects, both allocated, and again, if we were to allocate the rest of the project or receive grant funding per year, this is about our construction spending, construction engineering spending. How much of it is coming out of the drainage fund is the next column. Once you take out grants and TIFs and hospitality fees and other things, CWS matching. This is the section again of unallocated money that we expect to need. Again, whether it's a grant, whether it is allocated in those years, there's options. And then down here is the breakout of what those unallocated dollars are each year. So you can kind of see what are we talking about from a project perspective. So 2023 is Forest Acres, 2024, again, if we were to choose to allocate Barbary Woods, Concord Pump Station, if we were to choose to allocate King UG Phase 2, or if we look, hopefully we'll get grants on some of these as well. We've been incredibly successful with grants, but it's not a guarantee. So that's the first sheet. That's the quick roll up. The second tab is projects of consideration that we're also aware of. This is Central Park or Wamba, which Councilman Gregory talks about quite a bit, and where we expect to see costs in the future. Of course, none of that has been allocated at this point. We've only had the stormwater account allocated in for initial design work. DuPont Wapu, again, we have a county contribution, a small project allocation for the design, the initial design work, but then we have our expected basically unfunded construction work for phases 1 through 4. Lake Daughter.
Before leaving there, Mr. Fountain, I don't understand. We've been working on this thing in one form or another 5 years. When we first had the joint session between over at Old St. Andrews School,
right,
between the county and the city and the community to work on this. What the county? When I speak to the county people, well, it seems like they got their money ready to go. Why are we out in 23 before we even get some construction going on this?
So we are likely to need the rest of 2022 to finalize the design and permitting work and the property acquisition. So we can't really start construction until we get that property kind of agreed upon with the Epic Center, the way it's laid out. And then we have to get our permits finalized once we have that acquisition.
So the biggest problem on getting property is with the Epic Center?
For the first 3, or I think it's projects 1, 3, and 4, the project to the south along 17 would be with Mr. Blassis, but that's a different set of project than the Citadel Mall project.
I mean, have we sat down with Mr. Blassis yet?
We have.
And you got anything resolved? Where are you on that?
I'd say we are still pretty far apart on how much money we think the easements are worth to do the drainage improvements.
So at what point in time do we begin to put some sort of improvements in for Ardmore, Sherwood Forest area?
So they will see some secondary benefits by improving the downstream area, Mr. Chairman, but some of those are into this DuPont Wapu projects 5 through 10. That is still a project we've done the conceptual engineering, but not gotten into design and permitting yet. We just need to get funding allocated to be able to design and permit those, but you can't design and permit them until you get phases 1 through 4 finalized from a design and right-of-way perspective.
Well, hey, I won't hold up the meeting anymore with that, but circle back.
Property acquisition is always the most long-term and frustrating part of any.
Yeah, I get that, Mr. Fountain, but it took less than 6 years to do the Ravenel Bridge. And that's the largest infrastructure project in the history of the state of South Carolina. So, again, when you start talking about 6 years of trying to get some piping, and I'm oversimplifying it, and we're trying to work jointly with the county, it's something about that doesn't sit well. Yeah, you're talking about 5 to 10 years. So now you're talking about 15 years potentially before this gets done. Anyway, I'll circle back on that, but something about that doesn't sit well. Let's put it like that. Matter of fact, it didn't do 50. I think for the low battery wall, I don't think it took 15 years. Anyway, because I've only been on council in my 11th year.
Sure.
Continue.
Yeah. And unfortunately, those didn't have a right-of-way acquisition component, which is where we tend to get sidetracked for the length of time that we're talking about. Unless we go with condemnation, which certainly adds cost to projects, but does speed them up, which is what DOT will generally move to when they are doing.
Well, that's my point on this thing with, I mean, you've got water going in people's housing. And a lot of times you're talking about gravity flow to fix it. We're not talking about getting some well that's 180 feet down in the ground, and then, $50 million worth of pump stations. We're talking about getting right of ways, I mean, for a common good. If it means eminent domain, we do that. Put it on the table. That's either we vote it up or down. But if we don't get the 7 votes, it doesn't get done. If we get the 7 votes, it expedites the project. But I know one thing, not asking for it doesn't help.
That is,
just
Mr. Chairman,
kick the can down the road.
and that is, I guess, Mr. Chairman, where we get back to the funding allocations. That's part of what we're having that discussion is if we have funding allocated, we have more options on how we can move a project forward. But without funding, we're normally kind of scraping and trying to keep it moving the best we can without much in the way of resources.
You see, for example, we got Barberry Woods up there, and Sherwood Ardmore have been suffering with drainage longer than Barberry Woods has been built. Okay, I mean, these people have been fighting with drainage problems for decades. Barberry Woods, I don't even know if Barberry Woods is 20 years old, but Ardmore is probably 50 years old. So it's not your fault. My point is, if we got to put something on to expedite it, but I know 5 to 10 years is just ridiculous on that. Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. And I mean, I think you're touching on something that's extremely important, and it's the reality. I mean, the scale and magnitude of the flooding problems, especially off the peninsula, just dwarf our current funding revenue streams dedicated for stormwater. I mean, we just don't have enough money to solve these problems, and without redredging the conversation we had about Councilman Shealy's item, I mean, that's why we either need to be given legislative authority to have a serious stormwater funding stream of revenue, or I don't know, because right now it feels like we're, for all the wonderful things we're doing downtown, and my God, we're doing some amazing stuff with Spring Fishburne, et cetera. Right. It is just, it's like you're going into another galaxy when you get off the peninsula into these other areas, and it impacts every single one of our districts. And it's not anything the city is doing wrong, so to speak. We just have a water gun, and we're being asked to put out a 5-alarm blaze. And this is a serious problem. I mean, if the city of Charleston could pass a 0.5-cent sales tax specifically tailored for stormwater matters, I bet you we could bond off that revenue and solve all these problems. We just don't have the power to do it currently, and we need it. And look what the county's been able to do with the 0.5-cent sales tax. We just need something similar to do this, because the drainage fund and the stormwater utility, fee is just not going to get us there on its own, unfortunately.
I understand, Councilman. I agree with you. Not 99%, 100%, but at some point in time, we got to get an action step. And if that means we pass on the city a 0.5-cent sales tax for drainage and carry it up through the court system, at least we got an action step going. Okay, right now we have a hotly contested conversation, and that's it. The people on the state level aren't challenged with that. Right now, they're not challenged with saying, I don't support a 0.5-cent sales tax for drainage in the city of Charleston. Our state representatives, and our senators, and our delegation are the ones that, in my opinion, that should be supporting that in Columbia. But we're not even asking them to do it. Councilman Shade.
So as we're going down this list, Mr. Chairman, you'll see the under item like number 28 and 29. These are the two pet projects that I've been working with Mr. Fountain about. And to the point that we've been talking about all of this stuff is, right. Look, these are expensive projects, but they're small in dollar numbers compared to what we're looking at with $10 million over here, 7.5 million over there. But it has such a huge impact on our community. And I know I'm beating the dead horse. I'm speaking and I'm fussing with the choir on this thing. But this is a problem that we don't have a priority list on how to tackle this. And here's a concern. We know we've got a limited pot of money available. How do we spend this money? About half our city's population is over in West Ashley.
Yeah.
And so our citizens, and I get it. I mean, the September Clark Parkway is an important. It handles a bunch of traffic that people go back and forth from Mount Pleasant to West Ashley. People come down to the Low Battery to enjoy that. And that's a huge economic benefit to us. I get all of that stuff. I mean, I know none of these are not unimportant projects, but how do we get our hands around this thing before it's taking control over us instead? That's the issue here that we're dealing with, frankly.
You're right. It gets more expensive.
It's controlling us instead of we controlling it.
Right. It gets more expensive the longer we wait. You're 100% right. It ain't getting cheaper. Personally, that piece that Councilmember Pell just said about that, half-cent sales tax for drainage or some sort of, some portion of a penny for drainage. I think we do it, and then we get in the courts with it, and let's see where it goes. Because at the end of the day, I think we have to try for our people. I don't think if somebody wants to come at me because I want to try to raise money to fix drainage, I'm okay with that. I really am okay with that. To me, it's affordable housing because people have to live and drainage in that order. And it's like 1 and 1A. Okay. So I don't have any trouble. Want to put something on the agenda, Mr. Mayor? If you don't want to sponsor it, I don't have any trouble sponsoring. If we can get a second, we get a majority. We need to make that be an issue, man, because this is something that's germane to the coastal areas. If you live up in Greenville, that's not the issue with you. Or even Columbia, that's not an issue. But the challenge needs to be thrown out there, to tell you that. All right. Mr. Fountain, I feel sorry for you having to listen to all of this, but at some point in time, we got to get you some money. And I mean serious money.
So,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, just as the only things left in the presentation, just if there are any projects after I send out the sheet that anyone is aware of that they don't see on the sheet, let me know and I'll make sure it's not one of the small projects we've been working on, but just want to make sure I haven't missed anyone's projects. And then the last item was just this work capacity graph kind of showing where we've been, which was starting in 2019. The top is showing projects that were in design and the bottom is showing projects that were in construction. And basically moving through 2 years ago, last year, kind of seeing our design continuing to ramp up, and now we're starting to ramp into construction in 2022, even though we were already in 2021. Still heavy design in 2022. 2023 then sees an incredible amount of construction as is 2024. And our design starts to taper because, as we're talking about, that's where we would look to see allocation of potential future projects by 2024 or so, is in like a traditional project pipeline, where as things go from design to construction, new things are going into design and the next set go into construction, kind of working our way through.
Okay, can you go back to the previous page, please? And I'm gonna go back to projects for Councilman Shea, the West Pawnee, number 28. Can you tell me, Mr. Fountain, I've seen it, Councilman Shea. Can you give us a little brief description, Mr. Fountain? What does that entail? I mean,
this is the area we looked at where there's a section of West Ashley neighborhood, kind of just to the west of Old Town Road that
I know.
It's an older set of neighborhoods that really weren't built with much of a drainage system.
Right.
Individual roads have drainage, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It kind of runs into the next neighborhood was built without allowing for an outfall. So what we were looking to do here is basically move that drainage one road to the south where there's some existing piping, upsize that piping, and then install a new pipe and roadside drainage along that road. And I can pull up the road names if you'd like in a map, and take that water to Old Town Road where there does appear to be capacity to get it out to an outfall.
Right. Let me ask this. Is this the one where a lot of the water comes off of, I still call it Ashley Plaza Mall, but runs through the neighborhood, creating problems?
That's a small project issue that Mr. Fountain has available for us. And that we've been tackling that issue. This is a little bit different.
Okay. All right.
Actually, Councilmember Waring, this impacts a little bit potentially where your district and my district kind of almost intersect. This is over there by Bamboo, West Pawnee Place, Gilmore Street area.
Oh yeah, now I know. I got when you mentioned Gilmore, I know.
Yeah, and this is West Pawnee Place, which is a cul-de-sac built in the 80s in an area that probably the city did not pay a whole lot of attention to back when it was constructed, because and we've actually got a pump that the city installed in these people's backyards that we have to take care of. It's been some relief with that pump, but this is the one that we've been dealing with for 5 years, trying to get it addressed.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Is this one where the judge?
Yes.
Judge? Yeah, the judge. Yeah. Well, he's got a problem.
Oh,
okay.
I told them that we've added access. The property went up in value because they got waterfront property now.
Mr. Mayor, I think you had your hand up. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did just want to update y'all that, I stay in touch with our friends at the Municipal Association, and for some years now, they've kept alive a request to the state legislature for additional half-cent sales tax local option for infrastructure. There's been no appetite, according to Todd Glover, our director from the legislature, for that. Perhaps if we put a flooding drainage spin on it, or specialty, we might have a little more success with that in the future. But the state legislature is not very responsive to any kind of increase in our authority to raise revenue in general. That there is that reality out there. Now, I did want to remind everyone that we had made requests for a bunch of these existing projects for some of the state ARP funds, and what the proposed budget, where it's headed is that some substantial figure, either 900 million, I'm sorry, depending on who you talk to, will be kind of moved over to the deceptive name Rural Infrastructure Agency to do grants for water, sewer, and for drainage. And so our intent at this point, when that state budget gets approved and all those funds get moved over to the RIA, is that basically anything we got here, $1 million or more, is to apply for funding through this mechanism and see how we do with that. Given that we have so many shovel-ready projects, because from what I understand, we'll be able to apply for existing projects like the shortfall of Phase 2 West Ashley, or for any of these really. So we'll see how that works out, but we're certainly going to be applying for those, and every dollar we get from any of them is a dollar that we can move to one of these future projects. So I just thought I would share that based on y'all's discussion a minute ago. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. Believe me, we needed that after realizing looking at this list. Anyway, Mr. Fountain, I think you're all in. Okay, thank you for doing this. You're right. It would send the spreadsheet out without explanation. You're right. Would have been a little bit of a foreign language. Any additional input? It's been a long meeting. I appreciate everybody's input, but we are where we are on these projects, and it takes hard work to get this stuff done. No doubt about it. It's not ceremonial work. Councilman Shea.
Just a follow-up question to, I think Mr. Fountain answered this from what Councilmember Pell brought up. We are on the books for an ad hoc committee meeting to address this. Matt, is that set up yet?
Hasn't been set up yet. Amy's going to try to set it up at first, early in May. I mean, early in April, before our next April meeting.
Okay.
And so that April meeting is going to address what we went through with the unallocated projects? Is that what we're going to be doing in April?
She's going to walk through, I think, what amount of unallocated drainage fund money exists over the next 5 years. And then we can make some decisions as a council on, or as a budget ad hoc committee to council on which projects to allocate those funds into so that the department can, advance those project efforts.
Thanks,
Okay,
Rick.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
I'll make one last comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman and my
Yes,
colleague.
sir.
That last slide, we didn't spend a lot of time on, the one showing the capacity, but
Right.
if you think about it and look at it for a minute, it's pretty a remarkable shift that's occurring, that's leading to incredible investment this year, next year, and in 24 from the planning that we've been in design that's been going on over the last few years. You see how the green
Right.
portion gets bigger and then goes smaller, and more construction is occurring. And I would say, without a heck of a lot more staff, that Matt and his team have really kind of maxed out just the capacity of what we can spend it in any given year.
Right.
There is the reality of that, but it also, I think, shows here in this one picture what a terrific job they've done over the last couple of years in moving all of these things along. So
you're right, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'm kind of remiss looking at what we need to do. What we've done has been phenomenal. I mean, if you go back 10 years ago and come forward, I mean, the graph would be on a 45-degree angle, going from little getting done and to a lot being done.
That's right.
With limited resources, frankly. A lot of that, Mr. Fountain, I mean, your team your leadership and the team you put together has created efficiencies that allowed us to do some of this, frankly, and the knowledge that you brought. So thank you so much for what you've done. There's nothing like having things to do and don't have the money to do it. Man, that's frustrating for all of us. Let me ask this: where is the West Oak Forest, Playground Road project? Where is that on any of this?
The that's Forest Acres Phase 2.
Oh, Forest Acres. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah, that one is supposed to go out to construction bidding or go on bid line tomorrow.
Okay, great. All right. Listen, we got to start providing meals for these kind of meetings, man. Golly.
And you put off two things till next time.
I know. All right, listen.
I thought I went over at real estate. Sheesh.
I know, man. See. Anyway, if you want, we got a drainage project we can sell you in real estate, man, if you want it.
Absolutely.
I'm just kidding.
We got a lot of good work done today.
We did. All right, listen, I won't even wait for a motion. By acclamation, we stand adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for all. This was a good meeting.
Thanks, everybody.